Hi, I'm Doris with Something to Ponder. This is episode 4 of Finding God in the Walking Dead. Now, if you haven't seen the previous episodes, then you might go back and find those because they'll give you a better context of what we're talking about. Basically, what we're saying is we're looking at the similarities between how the living deal with the dead in the AMC original series, The Walking Dead, and how Christians deal with sinners. So in the last episode, we talked about one way is that they just walk on by, they don't do anything. But that's not always possible. Sometimes the dead are between the living and something they need to survive, whether it's food, shelter, medicine, whatever it is. An action must be taken in order to get what they need. There's also times when the living will use the dead for their own purposes. Like in the spin-off series Fear the Dead, there was a community that they built a wall around their town, and then they went out a little further and there was another wall, and they filled the space between the walls with the dead. And the purpose was to use the dead as a deterrent to invaders so that the bad guys couldn't come in and terrorize their people or take their stuff because they wouldn't want to try and cross the dead. So it just so happens that Jesus had to deal with exactly these same two situations in the Bible in John chapter 8, when a group of men brought before him a woman who was caught in the act of adultery. It was a situation he couldn't ignore, and it was brought to him by a group of men who were using this woman for their own purposes. Now, so since Jesus should always be our example of what to do or how to handle a situation, how did he handle this? So let's look at John chapter 8, verses 1 through 6, just real quick. Say, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery, and they made her stand before the group. They said to Jesus, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write in the ground with his finger. So, almost from the beginning of my concept of this series, I knew that I wanted to use this woman and her story as my example of how we should and shouldn't do things. But in my theatrical mind, I had always pictured this scene playing out more like this. It says she was caught in the act of adultery, so I pictured these men rushing into the house where she was, grabbing her out, dragging her down the street, naked. They're going down the street, people are hurling insults, they're kind of gathering a crowd as they went. They get to Jesus, they just throw her down at his feet, and they say, the law says stone her, what do you say? And Jesus bending down and writing in the dust. Now, with that scene in mind, I had this really awesome point to make about how when he bent down, he was down there where she was, and you would have just gone, oh, that's really good. But my problem was, it doesn't say she was thrown down at his feet. So I don't ever want to be accused of adding to scripture. So now I'm stuck. I was like, well, now what? So I thought, well, you know what? Let me read it in a couple of other translations. Maybe they'll say that she's thrown down at his feet. No. So I thought, let me look at some commentaries. Maybe they'll say something that gives me that impression. I got that impression from somewhere. So, nope, didn't say that. So at that point, I'm really ready to just throw out the whole project because I can't make this awesome point that I wanted to make. So I'm like, come on, God, help me out just a little. So I thought, you know what? Let me look at some laws, the laws and punishments concerning adultery in this time period. And that's where I got some really interesting information that put this whole scene into a whole new context for me. So, looking at it under my newfound wisdom, you have some men who have brought this woman before Jesus, and they are bringing a charge of adultery against her. And the very first thing that Jesus does is kneel down and write in the dust. Now, for us, in our modern worldview, that's just something quirky that Jesus does from time to time. But Jesus was doing that in response to this particular group of men. These men, it says, were the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. Now, everybody knows the Pharisees were the ultra-religious and they were very self-important. But they were also the scholars. They were the ones who studied the scrolls. They were the ones who knew the law, and they were very familiar with the writings of the prophets. So when Jesus kneels down to write in the dust, where we see that as just something odd to do, they should have seen Jeremiah chapter 17. In Jeremiah chapter 17, in verse 2, he says, it starts off with, "And even their children remember their altars and Asherah poles beside the spreading trees on the high hills." Now, the reference he makes to the Asherah pole, he says, even their children remember. So either their children remember because they're continuing in that practice, or they remember because the parents keep telling them about the good old days and they're wishing that they could continue to do that. Well, worshiping at an Asherah pole is idolatry. And any type of idolatry is spiritual adultery. And the practices that took place at the Asherah pole could be literal adultery. So you have this charge of adultery. And adultery is breaking a covenant. So because they have broken covenant, in verse 3 in Jeremiah 17, God says, "My mountain and the land and your wealth and all your treasures I will give away as plunder, together with your high places because of sin throughout your country." So he's saying, I'm going to destroy everything that you have and give it away to somebody else because you have broken covenant with me. And then down in verse 13 of Jeremiah 17, he says, "Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water." So, when we look back now at John chapter 8, we see a group of men who are bringing a charge of adultery. And they're bringing it to Jesus, who is teaching in the temple courtyard. So the temple courtyard is God's mountain. It's the place where, the temple being the place where God's presence dwells. So it's his mountain. So they're bringing this charge of adultery to this place, the same place that Jeremiah talked about in verse 3. This is where this is all taking place. And they're doing this because they don't want people to follow Jesus. We are not left to wonder or speculate what their motives were, because it states very clearly in John 8 verse 6, they were using this question as a trap in order for a basis for accusing him. So they're trying to trap Jesus because they think that they've got this covered. Because number one, if Jesus says to stone her, then the followers of Jesus who have been looking to him for love and acceptance, they're going to feel betrayed. And then if he says let her go, then that's a shot against his integrity because he's going against the law. So the Pharisees, they're thinking they've got this covered both ways, no matter that Jesus is in a no-win situation. And the whole reason they're doing this, and the whole reason that they're doing this is to discredit him. They're trying to keep people from following him. And the reason that they're trying to keep people from following him is because they, the Pharisees, do not accept him as the Messiah. Now, a little over 70 years from when this scene is taking place, this whole temple complex will be completely destroyed. And the reason that it was completely destroyed is because when they rejected Jesus as their Messiah, they broke covenant. And just like in Jeremiah 17, the people broke covenant and the mountain was destroyed. The first time the temple was destroyed. Now the temple is going to be destroyed again because of their rejection of Jesus. So, and that's the motive for these men, even though they are standing here and they think they're trying to protect their religion, but they're actually the destruction of their religion. And then Jesus is bending down and writing in the dust. Jesus, who has been known to refer to himself as the fountain of living water. So just like in verse 13 of Jeremiah, where it says, "You have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water," Jesus, the fountain of living water, is writing in the dust. Now, anything written in the dust is blown away. It's not remembered. What he's saying is, your names are not going to be remembered in the book of life. You're gone. These men who are standing here in all their self-importance and all their ambition, trying to protect their religion, are going to be destroyed. And they're going to be responsible for the destruction of the thing that they're trying to exalt. And that's the warning that's coming for Jesus, that Jesus is kind of sending out to these men right here in this time. And it's the warning for us. Because what these men were doing in this scene, they're a deterrent to Jesus. You have Jesus, you have these men and this woman, and then you have the followers who have come to see Jesus. You have all these people who've heard about Jesus, and they're seeking what he has to offer, and they've come, but they can't get to him because this scene is taking place, and right now they're just kind of watching to see what happens. It's almost the same as in the Walking Dead world, when people would come upon this town. Because not everybody outside that outside wall was a bad guy. Some people were just looking for a refuge. And they would get to this town and they would see inside the town the people were living with a measure of security and safety. And they really wanted that. But they weren't sure they wanted to risk trying to cross the dead in order to get it. But here's the thing. In Walking Dead world, the people who lived in that town could come and go through that town at will, because they had a way and a process that they went through to travel between the walls without getting hurt. So if they were on the outside and they found someone who they felt like was really looking for refuge, and they felt like they found someone who would thrive within their community, they could take that person and show them the way through the dead to get to the town. They could show them the process. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the ones showing the process. Because the same thing is happening in our world today. You have people out there who are looking for peace. They're looking for stability. And they're at the point now where they're willing to take a look at Jesus. But when they look into the church, and what they see is a group of self-righteous, pious, hypocritical people who are quick to condemn and always correcting, they're not sure they want to take the risk. So those people become a deterrent to the would-be followers of Jesus. Those people who think that they are so wrapped up in their religion and in their self-importance and in their ambition within their church, that they miss the relationship and they become a deterrent to someone else's relationship. Those people who think that they're trying to protect their religion are actually going to be the destruction of their church. That's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be the ones who are showing the way. Because let me tell you something about the Walking Dead world. That process that they went through was messy. And that's the way it is in real life too. We show the way, but we don't show the way with our words or what we're saying. We show the way with how we live our life. And so sometimes living our life gets messy. But when people see that our life is messy, but then we still manage to hang on to peace, we still manage to hang on to stability, then they know, you know what, it's worth the try, it's worth the risk, it's worth me being able to do it. Because remember, you don't have to have all the answers for the people that you're reaching out to. It was the religious, remember, the super smart, the super scholars who were responsible for the destruction. You just have to show them the way. You just have to step aside and just to show them how to go, and then let them follow. So that is the ponder for this week, or for this episode, is: are you in the way, or are you showing the way? So that's all for this episode. Join me again for the next episode. I'm not done with this woman. There's still much more to come, and some more interesting facts that I learned. So join me for the next episode, or don't. Love you. Bye.